Depending on where in the world you're dialing in from. Welcome to the 1T.org US Community Collaborative webinar. It's a new year, and there's a lot of new funding for forests that we are really excited to be able to highlight today on this webinar. So thank you all for joining us and learning from some of these fabulous presenters on funding opportunities that are currently open. We've got a really cool lineup of groups today. Next slide, please. And really excited to have Megan Morikawa, the Senior Manager of Natural Climate Solutions from Salesforce. Natalie Urban, the Director of Origination and Partnerships at the Symbiosis Coalition. Sean Penrith, the CEO of Gordian Strategies. And last but certainly not least, Paul Johnson, who is the Vice President of Urban and Community Forestry and Career Pathways for the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. So before we get into, I think, the stuff that you're all here for, which is about funding, I wanted to take a few minutes at the top here to talk about, with this kind of impressive crew, how they're thinking about 2025 from an opportunities perspective, from markets to regulatory structures, and get some insights from these really smart folks on how they're thinking about the year. So to kick things off, I want to talk to Sean and Natalie a little bit about voluntary carbon markets. You guys are well steeped, and Natalie, your RFP is directly for high integrity nature-based products. Natalie first, then Sean. How are you all envisioning 2025 looking for carbon markets and nature-based programs, and what are you excited about?
Great. Thanks, Kevin, and thanks everyone for being here. I think for me and for Symbiosis, our hope is this year is all about translating the big headline commitment we made into action. So for me, 2025 is about really getting the flywheel turning in terms of seeing transactions getting done, offtakes getting signed, investors deploying money into voluntary carbon projects in the back of offtakes, and hopefully a lot of case studies and lessons learned sort of shared among stakeholders so that we can accelerate the pace of transactions much faster.
Love it. Sean, how about from where you sit, kind of in the...
Yeah, I mean, our outlook for 2025 really centers on two main facets, the market being structured and improving on credibility. I mean, we all know we've come from some road wreckage in the past year or two in terms of VCM. We're working with a bunch of folks, many probably in this audience, in supporting a VCM 2.0 roadmap. And I think that roadmap, coupled with the good work from ICVCM in terms of their core carbon principles, are really going to help bring the credibility and the structure that ideally we need to mobilize the climate finance that we need. Thanks, Kevin.
Megan, from the buyer side, how are you in Salesforce thinking about?
Yeah, so Salesforce has always been a strong advocate for not only decarbonization, but also carbon credits. We purchase about 1 to 1.2 million metric tons of carbon credits a year and have done so for the last couple of years. As founding members of Leaf Coalition and Symbiosis Coalition, clearly the way nature plays a role within that is really important to us. And so we're also excited for Symbiosis to come live, as well as some initial leaf procurements. I think above all, though, for many corporates, all of the regulatory frameworks that are asking us to think really critically about materiality, our SBTIs, our reports, and compliance are all playing a really important role to ask where carbon markets play within that. And I think being on top of that will be helpful for all of us to understand the stability of the nature-based side of this market moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing cautious optimism across the board, which is I think welcome for this. Let's sort of switch gears. We've talked a little bit about the voluntary side, but more about regulatory and policy landscape and how you're thinking about different pieces of regulatory action that may be coming down the pike or may not be coming down the pike, and then kind of key milestones for the year that you'll be watching and tracking for as sort of indicators for both the voluntary and the regulatory side. Paul, let's start with you. Regulatory and policy things that you and SFI are thinking about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Welcome, everybody. I think cautious optimism is a good term to put for everything that we're doing right now. We're obviously in a time of transition. We don't know exactly what the next 4 years are going to look like from a political standpoint. And so I think that it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that not only are we doing the good work, but that we're really sharing the results of that good work. A couple of big things, of course, budget for urban and community forestry and the US Forest Service overall is definitely one of the things that we're looking at as you're looking at all of the huge investments that have been made over the last couple of years, making sure that we're able to capitalize on those and make sure that everybody, no matter what their political persuasion is, sees that benefit of our trees and forests really serving all of us through jobs, lots of ways that we're able to hopefully share that. And then another big one, of course, is the Farm Bill. And so if anybody here isn't part of the Sustainable Urban Forest Coalition, there is a sign-on opportunity right now for a letter going to the Trump administration for this transition, just kind of talking about urban and community forestry and the program at the US Forest Service and all of the good that's going on there. And so those are a few things that I think we're really looking at from that regulatory side on the federal. I think that there's some really rosy outlooks on state and local, being that SFI has only been really actively engaged for 4 or 5 years now in urban and community forestry. The voluntary side of local regulation is really important. That's why we've worked on the standard and the third-party certification options that come with that. And I think that we're going to see a real maturing of urban and community forestry this year as we take that pivotal year last year and really turn it into the action on the ground and making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah, love it. Yep, the implementation piece is critical, I think, and glad we got to touch on some of the urban and community pieces as well. Natalie, from the Symbiosis Coalition perspective, how are you all thinking about regulatory and policy?
Yeah, I guess the nice thing about being a voluntary market is we're not relying heavily on any sort of federal policy for the work that we're doing. Challenges that come with that, obviously, but I think the main thing that we're tracking is Article 6 and looking for as much certainty as we can find. Certain countries have provided more certainty on how they're going to handle Article 6 and corresponding adjustments. And those are the countries that it's much easier for us to sign long-term 10, 15, 20-year offtakes in. So that's the main policy piece that we're tracking. It's not necessarily that it's a bad thing if there's a tax and a corresponding adjustment. I think what our buyers are looking for is certainty on what that will look like.
Yeah, great. Megan is one of those buyers. How is Salesforce thinking about the regulatory and policy landscape for this upcoming year?
I think certainly as a tech company, we're thinking very broadly in terms of the regulatory and policy landscape, but that is also one of the things that I want to highlight in today's funding opportunities. The motivations for why Salesforce, a tech company with software solutions, invests in nature and forests is primarily philanthropic. And so that protects us from a lot of pressures that might be regulated upon a business directly, since it's not our core business, provides really interesting opportunities for us to catalyze innovation. So we're certainly excited about that. We always care about integrity. And so how integrity defines the quality of any of our carbon market signals or philanthropic funding are also really important to us. But I think it's always important to think about the private sector as a spectrum of a number of different industries that have varying impacts and dependencies in the regulatory framework.
Love it. Sean, COP30 in Belém in Brazil, the first Amazon COP and at least climate COP in history. How are you thinking about the regulatory policy landscape globally and some of the milestones from where you're sitting?
Yeah, let me start with some of the milestones. So the claims directive in the EU is gonna be a significant milestone because companies are gonna have to address their use of credits. That's obviously a big piece. We've all seen extrapolations of market demand through the CORSIA scheme through the aviation sector. So we watch that very closely. Obviously, there's not enough CORSIA approved credit supply, which is it will put interesting supply pressure. As I mentioned before, the rollout of the core carbon principles under the ICBCM will be a very signature milestone as we move forward. And then finally for COP30, I mean, I'm hopeful that we're going to build on the momentum of the last COP, where we get greater transparency, specifically as Natalie was talking about letters of authorization, the migration of a voluntary carbon credit into an ITMO that can be used in an international transfer is very exciting. We see a lot of potential in the voluntary carbon market, basically supplying the ITMO market, not dwarfing corporate ambition in any way, but a number of countries that we work with are seeing this as a very key revenue driver to fund their own sustainability initiatives and green infrastructure in their countries. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, thank you all, and appreciate you taking a few minutes off the top just to zoom out and think about what we collectively as a community should be keeping our eyes on out for the rest of the year. So thank you for that. And now for, I think, the piece that I think we're all excited about is we're going to do a real rapid, quick hit for all of these different fabulous funding opportunities, starting with the one that is most deadline dependent, and that is Megan Morikawa at Salesforce. Megan, why don't you talk us through some of the really exciting opportunities that Salesforce has out in the market right now?
Really happy to do so. And if there's anything I also want to kind of touch on is to give a bit of a sense, especially as a corporate, a major corporate who has a number of initiatives ongoing, to detail a bit on why it is that we're doing this funding in the first place. It gives us a sense of the stability, the size and scale, and how it's important to Salesforce. And for us, it really comes back to our corporate values that drive everything that we do, where it's an incredibly unique thing to see sustainability and equality as something that is as important as trust, customer success, innovation, which we see throughout our philanthropic funding as well. Since the beginning of this company 25 years ago, Mark Benioff, our CEO, said, I want to make sure this company can donate 1% of its time, 1% of its product, and 1% of its profit. And that 1-1-1 model has been the origin of a sustainability strategy across 4 lines that has always focused on nature positive, not only in reducing our nature impacts, accelerating that nature positive journey for all of the customers of Salesforce, but thinking about restoration at scale, which is one of the reasons why Salesforce and Mark Benioff in 2020 helped to kickstart 1T.org, an initiative from many corporates, now 87 strong, to pledge their resources towards forest protection globally. Salesforce's pledge in 2020 was 100 million trees by the end of the decade, but that's just one of the 3 ways that we currently finance nature. We also have a 100 million climate justice and ecosystem restoration philanthropic fund that started in 2023, goes till 10 years after that. And then, as I mentioned earlier as well, we purchase about 1 to 1.2 million metric tons of carbon offsets a year, of which a large portion of that portfolio are nature-based. When we're talking about our 100 million tree commitment, I'm really excited to bring 3 areas of themes for our funding to carry us through the rest of the decade, to focus really in on trees where Salesforce lives and works, these material elements of understanding where do forests play a role for our bottom line business, for our employees, and the places that we are a part of as a business. Trees with our customers, as the customer company, many of the other industries that are much more forest dependent than tech are customers of Salesforce. It's in our interest for them to have nature positive journeys. So we work with them on that journey as well. But we also have this trillion tree commitment, and Mark Benioff is deeply associated with a lot of this work to see if we can reach this kind of potential of 1 trillion trees, or a potential of 30% by 30 under protection. And so we're also really passionate to fund areas where Salesforce can catalyze a trillion tree movement, all of this in line as well with 1T.org. And this particular set of funding, we are working with Plant for the Planet, who also help us to power our trees.salesforce.com platform, where you can visualize all of the projects we've funded historically on 2 themes. And those are the opportunities that are closing tomorrow, but hopefully we've set up the intake interest forms that if you are an implementation partner who's hearing about this for the first time, we expect if you do have active projects that are eligible, those should take you about 30 minutes to an hour to fill out. So we do hope that there still is time in case this is of interest. One that focuses on where trees are that are material to where Salesforce lives and work. When we do a nature assessment across our whole business, we find the most material thing is our water consumption, not only for our offices, but also our data centers, since our company depends on not only these data centers for our product, but expects them to grow with the advent of AI and our positioning an agent force, an AI-based way to digitize a labor workforce. And so we're thinking about integrating action for water through both improving and being best in class in our disclosure, reducing our water usage, increasing our efficiency in our operations and value chain, but then also taking action to mitigate stress within major water basins that are important for us. And in some of those water basins, forests play a really critical role to be able to improve the water quality and quantity, help us regulate water supply. And this is what we're looking for within some very specific geographic regions that are intersecting with where Salesforce lives and work. Can we also demonstrate that forests can play a positive role in boosting resilience and adaptation in the long run? So that's the first of the 2 funding opportunities. The second, which has no geographic limitations, but is really thinking upon what are these next steps that we can take to catalyze a trillion tree movement. Last year, Leland Worden and a number of other restoration ecologists came together to assess innovations for upscaling forest landscape restoration. They landed on 7 ecological innovations that ideally, and according to this section here, shouldn't be that much more than the status quo of background normal restoration practices, ranging from mixed plantings, using economic species, to some more innovative approaches that are looking at soil microbiome and biochar. But all of them across the board had initial demonstrations of increased vegetation recovery over background noise. And we wanted to really see if we could promote the use of these ecological innovations, develop protocols, and support all of you to know not only where to plant forests, but also how to do that more effectively. So those 2 are the summary of what it is that we have as submissions that are open until end of day tomorrow. Within the category of trees where we live and work, forests for watershed health and resilience, we have multiple opportunities for grants that are in the 250 to 650,000 range. Within very specific geographic priorities, within our summary intake form, there's all sorts of information as well about eligibility for geographies and as you as an organization. Secondly, for where we can catalyze a trillion tree movement, supporting ecological innovation and tree restoration, multiple opportunities from a 200,000 to 1 million range for restoration projects that demonstrate using these ecological innovations. In the work that we're doing with Plant for the Planet, this is restricted to funding for nonprofits, but we welcome collaboration. So if you are a social enterprise and that work really closely with nonprofits on the ground, the nonprofits can be the ones who are primarily applying for efforts. Excited to keep you all posted as well. That's a 2025 till 2030 timeline we're talking about. So we're not only excited about future themes, but also shaping what those themes can look like by understanding what your needs are and helping to fill those gaps, and excited to do exactly that by having dialogues like these. So thanks so much, Kevin and 1TUS, for pulling together an opportunity for us to share funding opportunities.
Thank you, Megan. Impressive work and getting through all of that in such a short amount of time. So kudos to you. I popped a couple links in the chat there with the on how to learn more. Megan, if I missed any links, feel free to. We did see one question for you on from someone about philanthropic funding for CDR and nature-based solutions like biochar. So happy to let you answer that in the chat, or if you want to think about it now, that's fine too.
Yeah, super happy. Our carbon portfolio is not just nature-based. We think a lot about technical avoidance and also CDR as well. As a member of the Frontier Coalition, this is another really important initiative that we drive. Yes, we have a commitment towards CDR, but that's outside of the scope of what we have detailed here. I'm happy to drop a link detailing a bit more of Salesforce's work on CDR in the chat.
Brilliant. And one other quick one, how are the per tree costs quantified for the Forests and Watershed Health and Resilience RFP?
Yeah, this is an amazing thing of corporate company making a commitment over 10 years. Back in 2020, when we talked about 1 trillion trees, our objective was 100 million trees, and we're about 52 million into that timeline with the funding we've given thus far. The remaining funding that we were able to secure from Salesforce and its operations and the remaining tree count in order to get to 100 million factor into that ratio of how it is that we quantify the per tree costs, which we detail the amount of trees that we expect for your project to be able to cover in the summary intakes as well. But what I think is really, really important, we also recognize that tree count is one of many metrics that determine the success of a forest and the success of these projects. We've got teams, myself included, who have PhDs in biology, ecological backgrounds that understand the complexity of what it takes to be able to manage these dynamic ecosystems. And we do think it's really important to note we're not trying to find a race to the bottom of just looking for tree count as the one unit of measurement, which is why we have these ecological innovation and watershed objectives as a component of it. If you have any specific questions on how we arrived at some of those ratios, we cover that in the FAQs, and also always happy to dive a bit further into how it is that we can more how it is we can improve upon the process of developing RFPs that meet the needs and priorities that you guys are all managing on the ground to be able to implement more effective implementation programs.
Brilliant. Thanks, Megan, and more links in the chat. Round robin, next up is Natalie Urban from Symbiosis. Natalie, thanks so much for being here, and turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Natalie and I lead project origination at Symbiosis Coalition. So today I'll give a brief overview of what Symbiosis Coalition is for those that don't know. I'll spend some time going into the details of our recently launched RFP for reforestation and agroforestry projects. And then I'll highlight some different ways for folks to get involved with the work we're doing outside the RFP for those that may be on the call that are not project developers. So for those that don't know us, Symbiosis is an advanced market commitment launched and coalition of buyers launched by Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Salesforce last May with the goal of catalyzing the supply of high quality nature-based carbon removals at scale. And we're really focused on catalyzing the next generation of nature restoration carbon projects, those that are struggling to access financing today or have very high cost of financing given the risk profile. Our headline commitment is for 20 million tons under contract by 2030, but our goal is to grow both the membership here as well as the total commitment in the coming year. Our work is organized around 4 main pillars. The first is this headline commitment, which I just mentioned. The goal of this commitment is really to provide a clear demand signal and advanced market commitment to offtake a specific volume of tons. So if you're familiar with Frontier Coalition or Leaf Coalition, other examples of corporates coming together to send a really large demand signal to try to get more projects started, more investors coming into the space. Our second pillar is our unified quality criteria. So this is meant to really illustrate what we mean when we say a high quality carbon project. And I'll dive a little bit more into this. There's also lots of details on this on our website. The third, where I'll spend most of the time today, is this joint RFP that we're running. The goal here is really to ease the burden of procurement for developers so that they can access 4 buyers and hopefully more over time through one RFP process, one diligence process, and one contract negotiation process. And this is also the way that we translate that headline commitment into contracts getting signed. And then last but not least is this pillar of market development. And so our goal is to really share lessons learned as we go so that the pace of deals can really accelerate in this market. We're set up as a mission-oriented nonprofit organization, and so that gives us the ability to direct resources towards broader market development outside just our membership or the developers that are applying for our specific RFP. So in terms of the commitment itself, we have a goal to contract this, this big headline commitment of 20 million tons. But what does that actually mean? So these tons will be primarily under pay on delivery offtakes, which means corporates, our members, will pay for the tons as they are delivered in the future on a 10 or more year timeframe. So really long-term offtakes. The goal of these offtakes is to allow developers to go get project financing to get their projects started. So we're not the ones providing financing, but we're de-risking projects to allow project finance investors to feel more comfortable and more confident investing in nature-based carbon projects. The tons can be delivered before 2030 or after 2030, and we all know that trees take a while to grow, so we anticipate a lot of these tons might be delivered beyond 2030, and that's totally fine. We're thinking in a really long-term way. And then all the credits need to meet our quality criteria, but some may be sourced through the RFP, and some members may source projects outside of the RFP. So that's a question we get a lot. The RFP is one way to be part of this Symbiosis Coalition, but it's not the only way. Then in terms of our second pillar, which is our quality criteria. So we have first kind of an overarching set of pillars that will apply to any and all project types we do. Right now, we're focused on reforestation and agroforestry, but these will apply to our mangrove RFP and any other projects that we look at in the future. The main pillars you can see here: conservative accounting, durability, needs to have social and community benefits beyond just the carbon impact. Ecological integrity is super important to everything that we're doing. And then lastly, transparency, which is just important in helping the carbon market move to a next generation where it's more credible and more trustworthy. And then within these pillars, we have specific quality criteria for different project types. So we published our first set of quality criteria when we launched back in May for reforestation and agroforestry projects. We worked with a bunch of experts in different fields, scientific, NGOs, private sectors, to develop these. I won't go into too much depth here because it's pretty detailed, but please, I encourage folks to go to the website, check this out, especially if you're thinking of applying to the RFP. And I'll put links in the chat after to everything that I referenced. Okay, next comes our third pillar, which is the RFP and the main topic for today. So we launched our first RFP in early December for reforestation and agroforestry carbon projects. It's open until January 31st, so you have a little bit more time than for the Salesforce RFP, but not a ton of time. And I will say the application will take more than 30 minutes, so encourage folks to get started if you are in that category of a reforestation or agroforestry developer. We then anticipate launching a mangrove restoration and reforestation RFP later this year. And then TBD, what our next RFP will be. We'll see how these first two go. It could be a repeat of one of these first two project types, or we may look to expand into new project types, depending where we can be most catalytic in getting new projects started. Our goals for this first RFP is really kind of first and foremost, identify the highest quality projects and sign offtakes with them. The goal of this is to allow the developers that get offtakes to go attract upfront project financing. And then for developers, we're really trying to reduce the administrative burden as much as possible, publishing lots of resources. If you've been to our website, you'll see we have tons of resources there to help you apply to the RFP. And then lastly, for the market more generally, our hope is that this RFP can be beneficial to more stakeholders across the market. And so we'll be looking to publish lessons learned and case studies to really help more transactions happen outside of just our RFP. In terms of eligibility for the RFP, so projects need to be, of course, reforestation and agroforestry projects in terms of type. In terms of stage, we're looking for projects that are fairly mature in that they are ready to sign a 10, 15, 20-year forward offtake sometime this year. And so that means the project needs to have at least a draft PDD or feasibility study. It can't sort of be in very early feasibility stage. We hope that those projects will continue to progress and apply next year, but we have to focus on more mature projects for this RFP. In terms of project size, we don't have firm requirements. All else being equal, we want to see more climate impact, but bigger is not necessarily better when it comes to ecological restoration. So we'll obviously be taking that into account. In terms of geography, we are open to all countries at this point, except those on the US State Department do not travel list, primarily because we can't do site visits in those countries. And then we really want to see ecoregions where forest cover is ecologically suitable and where in regions where there's a high potential for ecological restoration and it's a priority region for ecological restoration. And then lastly, in terms of registry and methodology, we are open to all reforestation and agroforestry methodologies that have been at least applied to ICBCM's CCP for acceptance under ICBCM CCPs and must be accepted by ICBCM ahead of contracting. So that's really just to continue to create alignment in the market around ICBCM's approach to core carbon principles. One question we often get is how we're going to choose which projects move forward. And so there's really three elements that we're thinking about. The first one's probably obvious. It needs to meet our quality criteria. And so that's the first thing that we look at. Then, assuming you can pass that bar, we're looking at developers' ability to execute and actually deliver on the carbon and biodiversity and climate impact over the life of the offtake. And then lastly, we care about the commercial proposal. What are you actually putting forward in terms of price, volume, and other commercial elements? So really, successful applications will need to hit on all three of these. Quickly, just for those that are thinking of applying, this is just a snapshot of the timeline. Like I mentioned, it's now open. Please apply by January 31st. That's the kind of priority deadline. We'll have a few months or about a month process to do screening and prioritization before we go into intermediate diligence. Then a lengthy full diligence process, which will be about 2 to 3 months, including a site visit. And then we'll go into contracting in the second half of the year. And our hope is that if all goes well, we'll be signing contracts in late 2025 or early 2026, hopefully late 2025. Okay, I went through a lot of things very fast, so I just wanted to highlight that we have a ton of resources and links here, which I'll put into the chat. FAQs, we've been running a developer Q&A forum where we've been gathering questions each week and publishing answers so that everyone can see the answers to those. Our quality criteria, super, super important in terms of technical guidance. We have a readiness checklist to help you assess if you're at the right stage to apply or not. We've got some commercial guidance. And then last but not least, we have some resources for any projects that come across all of this and realize that they're not necessarily a fit for our RFP or maybe a bit too early stage, but we still want to support and help those projects out. And so we have a database of resources on our website for those types of projects as well. So with that, I'll just leave you with a slide here of how to get involved. Obviously, developers, you heard a lot today about our RFP. We're also looking to connect with investors to help finance projects on the backs of these offtakes. And we have a database that we're building out that we're aiming to publish in the next month or so. So would love to get investors included there. And then lastly, we are looking for new buyers to join us in our next cohort in the coming months. So please do reach out if you're a buyer on this call and interested in that. So great to be here with you all, and thank you for the time.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Natalie. And a couple of questions for you from the chat. One from Matt. So Symbiosis will not provide funding, but basically procure credits from project developers, sort of a guarantee scheme?
Yep, that's exactly the way to think about it. So if the credits are delivered, we'll pay for them and we'll set the price, which is a really big deal for investors who otherwise, they put money into these projects and there's no guarantee of the cash flow on the back end. And so what we're saying is we'll guarantee the cash flow. If the tons are there, we'll pay for them at a certain price. It takes the wild uncertainty of carbon price and carbon markets out of the equation. And so hopefully it allows financing and kind of lower cost financing over time for developers.
Brilliant. Thanks. Another question for you about what about if we're ready to submit in Q2 or Q3? Can we submit after January 31?
Yes, you can. We can only guarantee to review them if you submit by January 31st, and it will just depend how many submissions we get. But our hope is that we'll be able to keep looking at some proposals on a bit of a rolling basis. But the sooner you can submit, the better.
Brilliant. Thank you, Natalie. Okay, so from really cool watershed and ecological innovation to high integrity carbon credits, nature-based reforestation and agroforestry to impact investing and innovative finance and our friend Sean Penrith from Gordian Strategies. Sean, turn it over to you to talk a little bit about this really exciting opportunity for the US Endowment.
You can see that, Kevin?
Yep, can see very well. Thanks.
All right. Like my former colleagues, first of all, thank you for inviting us. It's a pleasure to deliver this opportunity on behalf of the US Endowment. I'm also going to speak rather rapid fire through it because it's a lot of information, but I will drop links in the chat. So this is the second round of impact investing. We've supported the US Endowment over the last couple of years, developing the impact investing strategy, piloting their strategy, doing a round one. This is round two. In short, for those of you that don't know us, we're a climate finance consultancy and we work on multiple continents. The mission for the endowment is to basically spur this intersection between the nation's working forests and forest reliant communities. They are a large charitable organization that was formed in 2006 when there was the agreement between the Canadian and the US government that led to the Software Lumber Accord. What they're doing, which is interesting, is instead of investing their corpus, as many of these foundations do, they're actually taking a portion of their corpus out and dedicating it to impact investing, which is when they brought us on several years ago to really deliver a proof of concept that this could actually work. The good news is it is working, which is why they're moving forward. These are the impact areas. The endowment logo in the center is really sitting at that intersection between supporting working forests, supporting resilient communities, and supporting healthy markets. They have a number of initiatives that you can read about on their site. They involve supporting traditional markets, future markets, ecosystem service markets, asset creation, and forest retention and health. The purpose is to create what led to the genesis of rolling out the impact investing program was to basically help provide catalytic capital that could support projects across the country while achieving capital preservation. So the idea is that they can generate an equal or greater return through their impact investing program than they can using the traditional stocks and bonds approach, which they've typically used in the past. So as I mentioned, it's been a multi-year genesis. They began in 21, where they were diversifying their programmatic support, investigating PRIs and MRIs. Then they approved an impact investing strategy. They piloted it. And then in 23-24, we helped with the first round where they deployed $3.5 million in 3 different investments. This year, they're hoping to deploy $6.5 million by Q3 of 25. The principles around the RFP, which will be assessed in the proposals that are reviewed, we want to make sure that the capital is being used as impact first. In their words, they sort of want to go where others won't venture, which we think is absolutely laudable. They want to fill a capital gap. They want to be catalytic. They want to be persuasive. In other words, can they help crowd in additional capital? And of course, central to their agenda is community revitalization. The eligibility of this particular RFP, you have to have an operation and a company in the United States. You can be a tribe, you can be a public body, but unincorporated individuals are not eligible. You have to meet these investment principles, as we've just described, the impact first, capital gap, and so on. And another key piece which we learned from round one is that the recipients the applicants need to confirm that they're in a state of readiness to receive funding within 6 months of the RFP deadline. Very important to note, this is not a grant-making program. While the endowment does have a grant-making program, this is an impact investment which is achieving 2 things, environmental impact and the financial returns. The proposals are expected to fall roughly within these parameters: equity or debt opportunities between $500,000 and $1.5. Endowment prefers to consider a maximum tenor of 7 years. Projected financial returns should be equal or greater than the 10-year Treasury rate. For debt structures, maximum LTV is 60%, and for equity, the endowment doesn't want to exceed an ownership position of 10%. Just a quick note on round one investees, just to give you a sense, and we're very happy at what came out. It shows the diversity. These ended up being in the same regional area in the country, in the Northeast. That was coincidental. The focus for the endowment is across the country. But Tanbach was an equipment financing project that needed capital. Whole Trees wanted to expand their Salesforce and production capacity, and Northern Forest Fund was supporting attainable housing. I won't go through these other than to say for Tanbach, as I mentioned, this was an equipment financing a gap that the endowment was able to slot into effectively, which really helped them ramp up their capacity. Whole Trees was a convertible debt to provide working capital to expand this business. And then lastly, Northern Forest Center's Forestry Fund was a debt investment into their impact investment fund. So basically, it was a blend of two different notes with different rates and returns. The schedule and logistics around this RFP, there are 2 steps to responding to the RFP. Stage 1 is mandatory. All applicants are encouraged to apply at encritea.io/Traro. And what this does is allow interested applicants to submit their narrative to 7 key questions, just 7. Once you've done that within 10 days, our team will give you detailed feedback using an analytical framework that we've developed over the years, along with a Traro pre-screening score. It'll come as a scorecard. And we use that to inform the endowment of the types of applicants that they can expect. But also, very importantly, we give the feedback back to the field because we're interested in, or the endowment is interested in, building field capacity. And much of our response has proven to be rather useful, I'm happy to say. Once you've done that, hopefully you take the feedback from the Traro, feedback from the GKS team, and you improve your design for your application, and you then use that in completing the full RFP. There's a Word template on our website, which you populate. It has the 7 questions that you've already answered in the Traro pre-screen, along with additional questions, and you have to submit financial projections, and you'll email both the RFP Word document and the financial projections to us at US Endowment RFP at gordian.strategies.com. The deadline is Thursday, March 13th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So the RFP came out on January 7th. We had an informational webinar on the 15th, yesterday. I'll drop the link in the chat in a second. The deadline for pre-screen submittals through the Traro platform is February 5th, and 13th is the deadline. What we will do is, as we select proposals that we believe have merit, we will then move into an investment term sheet that will facilitate the investment process. That will help us conduct the due diligence that we need, which takes about 4 weeks after we've requested information from you to populate a data room. All investment decisions are subject to the endowment's investment committee. We provide recommendations, but we have obviously no say there. And as I mentioned earlier, the endowment wants to deploy capital as soon as Q3 2024. Very quickly, 25% of the RFP evaluation is around impact alignment, 50% is on your business model, and 25% is on your investment structure. I will drop this in the chat so you can click those links, and feel free to email any questions or access the RFP itself. We also update a list of FAQs that have been pouring in, and you can access the webinar recording of yesterday that has a lot more detail on the pre-screening and populating the RFP. And that's the end, Kevin.
Brilliant, and kudos to all of our speakers for their brevity. And these are really complex RFPs, and thank you all for being able to do this so quickly. Sean, it looks like you did answer the question in the chat about project base, but for those who aren't following, this is limited only to US entities?
That's correct.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Well, last but certainly not least, Paul Johnson from SFI. Paul, excited to hear more about your opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kevin. Appreciate that. Hi, everyone. Excited to be amongst this illustrious group. Ours is a very focused opportunity. So hopefully you are familiar with SFI. Sustainable Forestry Initiative is happy to celebrate 30 years of advancing sustainability through forest-focused collaboration this year. We believe in a world that values and benefits from sustainably managed forests no matter where they lie. You may recognize our logo on paper products, other fiber-based products that you see out there. We've been active in traditional forest management, chain of custody, fiber sourcing for those 30 years. And in our last revision of our standards, the question came up, why aren't we doing the same thing for urban and community forests? And they put together a task group that really looked at it, polled the sector itself to see, are you interested in us bringing this tool to you? And the overwhelming answer was yes. So I was lucky enough to be brought in from the state of Texas, where I ran the urban forestry program for the state, to help kind of facilitate this, put together the task group. We created that standard over about a 2-year period, lots of public interaction on that development, did some pilot projects, even put together a red team to come in and try to break it as we were going from the second draft to the final version. Luckily, they weren't able to break it, just improve it a little bit. And we launched in 2023 and have spent the last 18 months really helping, particularly the practitioners, know that we are there, that we have this standard freely available for everybody on our website, and that for the first time ever, we're bringing into urban forestry third-party certification options. And so this is the first time that you have a chance to really sit down with an accredited auditor that goes through and takes a look and makes sure that you're meeting that standard and then can certify that you are. We have not created very many artificial lines. It can be used by any type of organization. So, of course, cities and towns are the ones I think most of us think of first, but colleges, universities, healthcare facilities, corporate commercial entities, tribes, everybody can utilize this tool and potentially get certified if they would like to. Well, as part of this process, we're like, we've got this great tool out here. So we did successfully become one of the 12 national pass-through partners with the Urban and Community Forest program at the Forest Service. And we have a little bit of funding available to kind of help organizations start to utilize this tool. So our Urban Forest Improvement Program is a way to go in and systematically review and evaluate your urban forest and the associated management program and find out where you're meeting the standard, where you're exceeding, maybe where you need a little bit more help. Well, particularly for cities, towns, tribes, potentially colleges, universities, maybe even a nonprofit, we have some funding available for a few projects to help you get a little further down that path. Not only have we created the standard, there's a guidance document that goes with it that helps you think of ways that maybe you are meeting those requirements that you hadn't thought of otherwise. And we've put together a tool, our assessment survey, that is an online digital tool that can take you through line by line of, okay, yes, we think we meet this, here's how we would show it, and can go through and do one objective, all 16 objectives. But for the grant, you need to do all 16 objectives. And not only that, but you'll also contract with an accredited auditor to sit down and go through and say, here is what we're doing, here's how we would show it, and get some feedback from them of, do they think that's good evidence for a potential audit? So again, up to $75,000. It is a pretty quick turnaround in terms of the deadline is January 30th. We may, if we aren't able to grant all of the funds out, or if some of those funds aren't utilized, we may have a second round of this, but I wouldn't depend upon that. The application is as simple as I could make it. So it's mostly contact information, description of the urban forest that you're going to evaluate, the impact you expect, and that impact statement is limited to 750 words. The area that you might have the most kind of development would be on the budget. So again, up to $75,000 available. Sitting down with that accredited auditor is probably in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. There's 5 or 6 of them out there that have expressed interest in serving for the Urban and Community Forest Sustainability Standard. So you'll be able to do an RFP if you want to, and get a little bit of competition between them to get the best price possible. These funds can be used internally, so you could use it to pay for somebody within your organization to help you do this work, or you could hire a consultant to do most of the heavy lifting for you. And so it's totally open. Would like to have it done within a year, but we know that with all of the other massive investment in urban and community forestry, there's been a lot of strain on people. And so if you think it might take more like 18 months to get it done, don't hesitate to apply. Let's have those conversations and see what's reasonable. So again, application deadline is January 30th. Up to $75,000 available, which is a good amount to be able to do this work for any size organization. Really focused in on those cities or towns or other organizations that include what the U.S. Forest Service has talked about as disadvantaged communities. So there's a link in the application on how you can look and see if your urban forest does include that area. And I think it's a really unique opportunity, particularly if you are at all interested in getting that third-party certification, because this will basically do almost everything that you need to do to get prepared for that opportunity. And so really excited to see what we get from here and what we're able to learn. I've dropped the link to this information into the chat and am always available. Either reach out to me or my U.S. director, Mike Martini. Either of us would be happy to work with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul, and your colleague Megan has been diligent about answering questions in the chat. And yes, this current opportunity is open only to US-based entities. So
yes,
right.
When it is.
Well, we have a few minutes left if there's any other questions, but I just wanted to make a quick observation about one of the through lines through all of these opportunities is I think the commitment to shared learning and knowledge transfer, and that none of these are existing in a vacuum where the information is sitting only with one organization, but the commitment from everyone, from Salesforce to Symbiosis to the Endowment to SFI, is about making sure that this knowledge is available to the entire community to scale, to make these markets better, to make the programs better, to make the communities better. So I just wanted to really name that as such an important way, and I think critical to the success of 1T is continue to socialize that knowledge from our very diverse and disparate communities. So thank you all to the funders and to you all for your commitment to that spirit of transparency, openness, and knowledge transfer. So a couple quick questions. One from Claire: will there be an in-person gathering this year? Stay tuned. The short answer is yes, and we're working furiously with a number of our partners to put times and dates to that. But yes, we will have a 1T.org US in-person gathering, and thank you for saying that. Question for Megan: is project funding limited to nonprofits, or can private entities participate as well?
For these two proposals, it is limited to nonprofits that have a U.S. charity equivalence. We are seeing applications that are collaborations where a for-profit group is collaborating with an NGO, but the NGO must be the one who is holding the primary fiscal responsibility for receiving the grant.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, Megan, Natalie, Sean, Paul, again, thank you for your time and talents. Thank you for spending some time with us today to socialize this. We look forward to we look forward to working with all of you on that socialization of all of your learnings from each of these opportunities in the future here at 1T.org and 1T.org US. So with that, let's give everybody 5 minutes of their day back for going outside and getting some fresh air and maybe hugging a tree or something, nice like that. So thanks again to all of our speakers. Thank you all for joining us, and Happy New Year from all your friends here at 1T.org US.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, panelists. Bye.
Appreciate it, everyone.
Thank you.